Real power doesn't shout, it doesn't perform. It enters a room like a storm that never speaks, just waits. Respect. It begins the moment you decide to hold your tongue, not in fear, not out of awkwardness, but with intent, a stillness that unsettles, because it wasn't expected. This isn't silence that begs to be broken. This is the kind that speaks louder than noise. It doesn't ask for attention. It commands it. And no one understood this better than the man who wore two faces, Niccolo Machiavelli, the ghostwriter of power, the architect of psychological warfare. He knew the world doesn't bend to kindness. It bends to perception. It bends to presence. And it breaks under the weight of well-placed silence. People talk too much. They explain what doesn't need defense. They rush to fill the air with justifications, apologies, noise. But noise is forgettable. It's background static in a world already too loud. Silence, though, true silence, that gets remembered. Because silence makes people look closer. It makes them wonder what you're thinking. It forces them to play mental chess with themselves. Not because you intimidated them, but because you unplugged from their game. And that is where real control begins. Let's call it what it is. The more available you are, the more they take you for granted. The more you explain, the less you're believed. The more reactive you become, the more predictable you are. But when you step back, when you vanish into a composed quiet, suddenly the entire room recalibrates. Because silence interrupts their expectations. They're used to replies, used to dopamine hits, used to you being on call, emotionally, mentally, digitally. Remove that access, and you don't just confuse them, you haunt them. They start second-guessing, replaying old texts, reading between lines that don't even exist. And all you did was stop responding. That's not cold. That's strategy. See, Machiavelli didn't preach fear for the sake of chaos. He preached distance for the sake of influence. He understood that if they can't read you, they can't manipulate you, because in silence, people project. They invent motives. They imagine truths. They fill in the blanks with their own fears. And that is power, because when you're always speaking, you're always revealing. You're giving away your game plan. You're showing your emotional GPS, and once someone knows your triggers, they can pull them whenever they want. But when you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop defending, you give them nothing. Just stillness, just presence. And that presence, one that doesn't chase, doesn't explain, doesn't seek to be liked, demands respect. Because here's the deepest truth. No one respects what they can predict. People don't value what's always in reach. They don't respect what they can tap on demand like a vending machine. And yet, most walk through life like open books, begging to be read, understood, accepted. But here's the cost. Every time you over-explain, you erase a little power. Every time you overshare, you dilute your mystery. And mystery, that's where respect lives. Machiavelli didn't just speak to kings. He warned anyone chasing influence. Never show your full hand. Never bleed in public. Never be so available that your absence goes unnoticed. Because real power doesn't wave. It watches. It withholds. It confuses. See, people lean into the quiet. They study it. They fill it with their own assumptions, their own fears. Let's zoom in. Relationships. The fastest way to train someone to ignore your voice, always answer, always justify, always respond within seconds. What happens then? You become a background noise they don't even register anymore. Your presence becomes a default setting, no effort required. But go silent, pull back, say less. Now every word becomes weighted. Every message is a moment, every glance a mystery, because silence rewrites the contract. It says access is earned, not assumed. In business, the same rules apply. The one who talks the most in a meeting isn't leading. They're leaking. They're broadcasting need, telegraphing desperation, begging for a yes. But the one who holds the line, who speaks less and watches more, that's the one who bends the room. Because saying nothing is often the loudest move in the game. Machiavelli once whispered a brutal truth. If you cannot be both loved and feared, choose fear. But he didn't mean brute force. He meant distance. He meant unpredictability. He meant uncertainty, the kind that keeps people on their toes. Because when people aren't sure how you'll respond, they tread lighter. They think before they speak. They respect your boundaries without needing to hear them. That's the paradox. Real boundaries don't require announcements. They exist in your silence. Silence isn't passive. It doesn't mean surrender. It's the sharpest form of presence, unflinching, undeniable, unavailable. But here's the real twist. Why is it so hard to go quiet? Because silence creates a mirror. And in that mirror, we see what we've been avoiding. Our own discomfort, our need to be liked, our fear of being misunderstood. You'll feel it in your hands. That pull to text back instantly. That itch to smooth out tension. That panic when someone doesn't reply. But what if you didn't chase? What if you let the silence breathe? What if you let the room adjust to you? Because when you do, something shifts. They start managing themselves. Their voice softens. Their assumptions turn into questions. They move differently because you stop trying to prove your worth. This is the art of controlled presence. Knowing when to appear, knowing when to vanish, knowing when to speak, and when to become the void. It's not manipulation. It's self-protection. It's mastery. And mastery is always quiet. Protect your energy like it's currency. Protect your silence like it's sacred. Because not everything needs to be shared. Not every room needs your voice. You don't earn respect by being everywhere. You earn it by being selectively nowhere, by disappearing just enough to make your presence feel expensive. See, we're trained to think visibility is value. Post every day, speak every hour, be in the mix. But that's noise, that's exposure, and exposure without purpose, that's erosion. You don't need to talk more to be understood. You need to talk less, so your silence does the speaking. Because silence is strategic. It's not weakness, it's not retreat, it's not avoidance, it's control. And the most dangerous person in the room, it's never the one barking orders or making noise, it's the one in the corner, calm, unreadable, calculating, saying almost nothing, yet owning the room. Niccolo Machiavelli knew this game. He didn't write for the loud. He wrote for the lethal. He warned us, words can be twisted. Words can be used against you. But silence? Silence has no fingerprints. It can't be misquoted. It gives nothing away. It forces the other side to reveal their hand first. Because the moment you go quiet, the world fills in the blanks for you. They guess. They panic. They project. And in trying to figure you out, they give away everything about themselves. That's where the real leverage lies. That's your upper hand, not in domination, but in observation. Power isn't always about action. Sometimes it's about the space you don't fill. Most people fear silence because it exposes them. They need texts, pings, updates, attention, like oxygen. But remove your voice from the equation, and suddenly they're off balance. They second guess, they stutter, they adjust. For you, you've now disrupted the rhythm, and when you break someone's rhythm, you break their control. That's not force, that's not intimidation, that's influence. And real influence is built in contrast, not in noise, not in volume, but in the quiet that cuts deeper than any shout. When everyone's talking, the one who listens becomes powerful. When everyone's reacting, the one who waits becomes unpredictable. When everyone's chasing approval, the one who doesn't care becomes iconic. Look deeper. Every interaction, every relationship, every negotiation, it's a psychological economy. People are trading attention, approval, time, access. And if you give too much too fast, you cheapen your currency. The person who replies instantly, expected, not respected, the one who's always available, taken for granted, the one who over-explains every move, seen as weak, not wise, but the one who pauses, who lets the silence stretch just long enough to feel intentional. They own the tempo. They control the room. They don't chase the rhythm, they set it. And that's what makes people lean in, not because you raised your voice, but because you raised your value through silence. Respect doesn't die with disagreement. It dies with predictability. When people think they've figured you out, you lose the upper hand. That's the first law of presence. Stay unreadable. If they always know what you'll say, how you'll react, when you'll break, they stop respecting you. Not because you're weak, but because you're too available. Niccolo Machiavelli warned us, never reveal your entire hand, not in politics, not in love, not in war, and especially not in silence. Because silence isn't the absence of power. It is power, but only when you can sit with it longer than they can. The person who controls the silence controls the room, not the one who talks first, not the one who talks loud, the one who speaks last, deliberately, calmly, like they don't need to be heard, but deserve to be. That's where real respect is born, not in the noise you make, but in the discipline to speak only when it counts. Look at arguments. Most people argue like it's a sport, desperate to land punches, prove a point, win. But in chasing victory, they lose the one thing that's harder to earn: composure, mystery, presence. Machiavelli would smile and say, let them talk, let them ramble, let them reveal their insecurities, their emotions, their weak spots. While you stay still, you watch, you listen, not to defend, not to attack, but to learn. And when you finally do speak, it's 10 words that shut down the 100 they just spilled. That's power. That's how influence works. It doesn't chase. It doesn't compete. It commands. Now let's take it deeper. Silence doesn't just expose other people. It heals you. Every time you speak without intention, you leak energy. You react. You explain. You drain your reserves. But silence? It's like a vault. It keeps your energy yours. And when you stop rushing to be heard, you start seeing what others miss. The nervous laugh behind their just kidding. The tension in the room when someone shifts their tone. The performance behind their confidence. Because now you're not operating from emotion. You're moving from sovereignty, from grounded, unshakable self-control. That's what creates gravitas, the quiet weight that makes people lean in when you speak. You've seen that person before. They walk in without needing to prove anything. They barely speak, but when they do, every head turns. Why? Because they've trained the world to listen, not by saying more, but by saying less, deliberately, strategically, calmly. If you want to become that person, stop thinking silence is empty. It's not. Silence is a wall no one can climb, a weapon no one can reverse, a presence that can't be manipulated, because nothing can be twisted when you've said nothing. Nothing can be weaponized when there's no quote to twist. Nothing is more powerful than nothing, and sometimes that's all you need. One silent moment, no reaction, no defense, no need to set the record straight. Just presence, just calm. Just the silent message that says, I'm not lowering myself to this. I'm not here to perform for people committed to misunderstanding me. I don't need to shout to be clear. And that will be remembered long after any loud voice fades. This is real respect, not loud, not desperate, not demanded, just earned, through stillness, through restraint. It's what Machiavelli revered most. Not charisma, not likability, but the rare kind of power that comes from being okay with being misunderstood. Silence demands courage, the courage to be misread, the courage to let others form opinions and not flinch, the courage to say, I know who I am, I don't need to argue with confusion. See, that's the final divide. The puppet needs to be understood. The master needs only to watch. The puppet over-explains. The master underreacts. The puppet begs to be seen. The master becomes unforgettable by staying unseen. And the question is, which one are you becoming? Because every time you rush to explain when no explanation was asked, you dilute your power. You train people to expect access they haven't earned. You shrink your aura by forcing understanding instead of cultivating mystery. Machiavelli would whisper, do not reveal your full intentions until it's too late to stop them. And silence? That's the perfect mask, not a retreat, a weapon, a wall, a strategy, because respect isn't something you request. It's something you engineer, not with shouting, not with tears, not with long-winded justifications, but with discipline, with strategic withdrawal, with the kind of calm that disorients people who live for control. See, the loudest people in the room? They're often just reacting. But the ones who say nothing are the ones everyone else adjusts for. That's not domination. That's leverage, psychological gravity. And gravity is built in one place, silence. Let's get one thing straight. Silence isn't passivity. It's not giving up. It's gathering data. It's watching who people become when you're no longer influencing the outcome. Because most people, they talk to fill the void. They explain everything. They beg to be seen, to be liked, to be validated. But in doing so, they hand over their power, piece by piece. They become predictable, easy to read, easy to reach. And here's the cold truth no one teaches. People don't respect what's always available. They don't value what's always visible. They don't fear what never withholds. Respect begins the moment you do what most people can't. You stop. You vanish. You stay silent, not out of weakness, but choice. And when you disappear, they start reacting. They start questioning their tone. They start replaying their last message. They start feeling the loss of access, even if you never said a word. That absence, that silence, that's value, not built through punishment, but through the quiet removal of your energy, with zero explanation. Let's go even deeper. We were all taught the wrong game. talk it out. Speak your truth. Never leave anything unsaid. But Machiavelli understood something more dangerous, more real. Control doesn't come from saying more. It comes from needing less. You don't owe people your presence. You don't owe them a response. You don't owe them closure. Sometimes the most powerful sentence is the one you never say. Power doesn't come from being loud. It comes from being measured, not saying nothing, but saying less and saying it at the right time. Your greatest influence, it's not in your comebacks. It's in what you refuse to respond to. You don't need to chase every insult. You don't need to correct every misunderstanding. You don't owe explanations to people who never valued your effort in the first place. You owe one thing: protection of your presence. And silence is how you protect it. 'Cause when you go quiet, people project. They overthink. They assume. They fill in the blanks. They assume you're doing better without them. They assume you're rising. They assume your silence is strategy, not absence. And here's the genius of it. Even if it's not true, you've already won, because now they're adjusting to you. That's the Machiavellian method. You don't ask for respect. You create conditions where respect becomes the only option, and silence is the first condition. Let's talk about today. In this world of constant noise, everybody's posting, replying, performing. Silence becomes luxury. Silence becomes scarcity. And scarcity breeds value. If you're always talking, your words get cheaper. If you're always posting, your presence gets forgettable. If you respond instantly, your attention becomes expected, not appreciated. But the one who speaks rarely and echoes for days, that's the one they remember. And this isn't about being mysterious just to look cool. It's about control. Control of your energy. Control of your boundaries. Control of your timing. When you appear, when you vanish. Because people remember the one who left at their peak. The one who didn't explain. The one who couldn't be figured out. They forget the oversharer. They forget the people pleaser. They forget the one who always stayed, always gave, always begged to be understood. Don't be that one. Be the one who ends a conversation without warning, not to disrespect, but because your time has expired. Be the one who speaks once in a meeting, but shifts the direction of the entire room. Be the one who leaves a text unread, not as a game, but because silence is the response. Here's the truth most won't admit. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate, but you retrain them by going silent. That's the reset, not a speech, not an argument, not a breakdown. Absence. When you stop showing up to places that drained you. When you stop answering calls from people who never gave you anything back. When you walk away from disrespect without turning around, that's when they finally feel your value, because now it's missing. Machiavelli once warned, those in power should never become too familiar. He was right. Familiarity breeds contempt, and it still does. Let them wonder. Let them question if they push too far. Let them replay your silence like a voicemail they never got to hear. And while they spiral, you grow. In stillness, in self-control, in clarity. Because while the world scrambles to be heard, you're building a presence that doesn't even need an introduction. You walk into a room, and the temperature shifts, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. You've become the person whose time matters, whose attention isn't assumed, it's earned. And it all started the second you went quiet. So now, it's your move. Will you keep filling silence to feel useful? Or will you start using silence to feel powerful? Will you keep justifying your worth? Or will you pull back and let them feel the void you used to fill? Because there's a line between being respected and being used. And that line starts the moment you go silent.